This podcast is sponsored by nobody. Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror and sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today I will be welcoming a very talented Canadian character actor that I've been a fan of for years, and I've wanted him on the show for years. Dee McCafferty. Now Dee, you may remember him, he was the bumbling bad guy Saunders in Short Circuit 2, and he was so damn funny in that role. And he was also a surgeon in David Cronenberg's Dead Ringers. Both those movies are celebrating the 35th anniversary, and we're going to talk about those today. And God, he's been in so much great stuff. Final Embrace with another guest of mine, Nancy Vallon. He had a lot of scenes with her in that. And he guest starred on Highlander, The Commish, Tech War, including an episode Shatner directed. Murder, She Wrote, lots of good stuff. And his credits stop after 1996, and I want to find out why and see what he's been doing since. Also, too, wow, so it's the final week of Halloween October, and it's been totally rad. This has been a great month, you know. I was worried for a while, but the strike hasn't affected it, and I've been interviewing great people, you know, people who aren't really in the business anymore, and it's been fantastic. And this week is going to be fucking awesome, and so is the last 2 days of next week. Just you wait. Yeah, the actor strike is finally coming to a head, it seems. I know I said that before, but the Alliance finally got involved, so we shall see what's going to happen in the next few days or so, and then I'll have more to update you on that. Sister Creature Con was fun, but frustrating. You know, I spent all this time in Elvira's line, and she just looked like she didn't want to be there. The interaction was awkward, but at least I got to meet Billy Zane and Angela Goethals and Kirsten Baker as well, and those experiences were pleasant. But I love that con, and I look forward to going again next year. So yeah, here is my interview with Dee McCafferty.
Hey, Tommy.
Hey, Dee, welcome to the show. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am just thrilled that this is such a great honor. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. It's my pleasure.
Awesome. So, going back in time, did you gravitate toward acting early on in your childhood?
Well, it's funny. I was a natural performer, but I didn't actually do any organized acting until I was 19 years old. I went to a summer theater school that was run by a regional professional theater company in my city. Mm-hmm. And that's the first time I started acting. I'd wanted to do it all my life. I just really never had the courage to do it. And then I finally said, this is it. I may as well start my life. And so I did.
What was this, up in Canada?
Yeah, that's in Canada, in a city called Hamilton, Ontario, which is about 40 miles southwest of Toronto, right along the shore of Lake Ontario. Hamilton is on the extreme western tip of Lake Ontario.
Right. And did you have any classmates we would know that became successful in acting?
No, I'm thinking hard. I don't think anybody that I knew there actually went on to really continue a career in acting. And also later when I went to school, I studied in New York some years after that at HB Studio, which was run by Herbert Berghoff and his wife Uta Hagen,
right,
who was a very famous person. And even the people that I studied with there, I can't remember anybody really achieving anything of any note. So there you go.
Yeah, I have talked to a lot of people who studied at HB, but it was mostly 60s and like to the mid 70s. Was this like late 70s, early 80s?
Yeah, it was actually 1982 that I studied there. I studied with Sandy Dennis.
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful Academy Award-winning actress. I was in her class, and I studied with technique with, that was scene study. I did technique with a gentleman named Walt Whitcover, who had taught and worked at the Actors Studio for years before coming to HB. And he was a wonderful acting teacher. I liked Walt a lot. He actually only passed away a few years ago, and he was well into his 90s.
Wow. And while you were there, did you do any like theater that you're proud of that stands out?
Yeah, I actually did. In terms of scene work, I worked with a guy who became a friend of mine for years after that. He and I and another guy did some scene work from a play called Private Wars, written by a guy named James McClure. James McClure also wrote a play that got produced quite a bit called Lone Star. He wrote one-act plays. So he wrote Lone Star, and he wrote another one, which is a companion piece to that called Laundry and Bourbon, which I ended up directing at a dinner theater sometime after that. So I was really happy to work on that. I did some scene work from Hamlet that I was very proud of as well. Monologues mainly, and one scene. So yeah, there was good work, and I really enjoyed my time there. New York City wasn't really for me, but that place, that school, and the people I studied with, I'll always remember that.
Yeah, how long were you there for?
Not that long. I think I was there about 6 months.
Wow, you did a lot in 6 months.
Yeah, I did. I ran out of money. It's what happened. I had applied for a grant in Canada to go to school there, and I would have gone a lot longer, and I had gotten the grant, but they didn't give me the grant. But it turns out I did a whole bunch of work, television work, that fall, and I accumulated a bunch of money, and I pretty much saved it all and said, yeah, I'm going to spend it all, and I'm going to go study in New York. I wanted to study with Uta Hagen, but when I got there, she was not taking any new students. Nobody who hadn't studied with her before could study with her on that particular term. So I was disappointed, and I auditioned for Sandy Dennis, and I was very lucky to get allowed into that class, and I think I benefited a lot. I loved her.
Yeah, did she become a mentor to you?
Not really. She was a little bit scattered in her way, but she was such a fine actress, and every now and then she would just say one thing, or you could ask her something specific about a scene, and she'd say, oh yeah, I know that moment you're talking about. No, that didn't work. That didn't work at all. And here's why it didn't work. And then she would tell you. So I liked her a lot. She was wonderful. She was a real character and just a brilliant actress.
Yeah, I heard she could be kind of complicated as well. So did you go to LA after that?
No, I actually went back to Canada. I went back to Canada after that, and continued my career, and things started off slowly, but they started to build up. And after some years, things were going well enough that I eventually did come down to LA. And most of the work that you probably want to talk about was done in Canada for the most part.
Right.
American films shoot up in Canada, as you know, quite a bit, because there's some terrific tax breaks, and the exchange from the American dollar to the Canadian dollar is pretty generous for Americans. So that provided a great financial incentive for American producers to go up there. So most of the work I did was up in Canada. I came down to LA. I did a few things here, but we could talk about that later.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it really ramped up during the 88 writer's strike, because a lot of productions started moving to Canada and Atlanta and all these different places. They had a lot of trouble shooting in LA for a little while during that year, It seems like now a lot more people are going up to Canada or Atlanta,
Yeah, and the reason they go to Atlanta or Alabama or one of the Carolinas and all these other places is they tend to be right-to-work states. So they tend to hire non-union people, and that saves them a lot of money too. Canada actually, in Ontario, is not a right-to-work place. They come up there for different financial incentives, but when they come up there, they end up using local IATSE, local Teamsters, and of course union actors as well. So they use full union crews and cast when they're up in Canada, usually both in British Columbia and in Ontario.
Absolutely. So the first job on your IMDb was an episode of the Canadian sitcom Hanging In. Yeah. I did about 5 episodes of Hanging In, which is a CBC comedy. Yeah.
There was a producer on that show. His name was Jack Humphreys, and the first time he saw me audition, he, for whatever reason, he couldn't stop laughing, and I was happy about that. And so he just kept hiring me back. He was a wonderful guy.
Yeah, Lolly Kadu was in that. I'm trying to get her. She was in David Cronenberg's Videodrome and
Yeah.
that period piece series, Avonlea. Very talented actress. What was she like to work with?
Oh, she was wonderful. Lally Cadeau. She was from a bunch of different places, but she also had spent some time growing up in my hometown. So we would chat about that from time to time. Excuse me. But
Mhm.
she was an extraordinary, just a really wonderful person and a very good actress. Very, very talented. Very comfortable in front of the camera, and that was something. That I always spent a long time trying to get with, is to feel that comfort in front of the camera. I was, to be honest with you, much more at home on a stage, and that
Yeah.
will always be the sort of thing that I love the most. But eventually I got better at it. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, stage is for the soul. Film and television is for the wallet. I've heard people say.
That's interesting. I kind of like that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you did an episode of Night Heat. How was that experience?
That was okay. I remember auditioning for that, and Sonny Grosso was one of the producers, and Sonny Grosso was actually in real life Popeye Doyle's partner in the French Connection. If you watch that movie,
Oh
I
yeah.
believe Roy Scheider basically played him in that. So he was part of that, and he had an incredible career as a police officer in New York City. Then he
Yeah.
produced Night Heat. He was one of the creative producers of that show, and just I only did one episode. I came in for an audition, and it clicked. It went well, and I remember doing something in the audition, and I it was an opening line, and the lead character gives me, and I said no. And I got up and I started to put my jacket on like I was going to leave, and he just kept asking me questions, and I just kept acting like I was in a hurry to get out of the office, kind of thing. And we finished the scene, and I remember Sonny Grosso said, "Yeah, I really liked your action there. That was good." So that was sort of how I got that one. Is sometimes you have to just sort of you do always have to animate what you're doing somewhat and make it look like.
Yeah. Did you
That's
work?
something I learned as an actor in New York, and that is you have to have a life apart from the scene. And what I was taught by Walt Woodcover was a method of physical actions, and that is establishing that you have a reason to be in that room apart from the scene, apart from the fact that the writer wrote a scene and put you in it. Why else are you in that room? And that's the thing that you pursue. And most people in life, you don't look to be in a scene. You look to go in a room and do something, and then get out of that room.
Absolutely. Did you work with Stephen Mendel?
Uh, no, I don't. I don't recall that name. I worked in that scene with just one actor, and that was what was his name? Sorry, I'm having a
Okay.
senior moment. Scott. Scott
Scott
was his
Hylands.
first name.
Scott Hylands.
Really good actor. Yeah, Scott Hyland, pretty famous Canadian actor. Really
Yeah.
good. Did great work in the U.S. too in his life. He was really good. Really good to work with. Nice guy.
Yeah, and Doug Lennox was in that episode. He was a legend.
Wish I knew who Doug Lennox was.
He was a Canadian radio guy, and he was the bad guy in Police
Okay.
Academy, and like he acted, and he would always play the bad guy.
Okay, yeah. I envied those guys, those bad guys, because they worked a lot. As you just said, this person always played this, and this person's a legend. It's like if you're a bad guy, especially in Canada, they don't seem to have as many bad guys. So if you're a bad guy, you're going to work.
Yeah. Then you had a
Or
role
if
in.
you're good looking.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I apologize. Go ahead, Tommy.
Then you had a role in Doing Life with Tony Danza. I think it's one of his best dramatic roles. What was that experience like?
Oh, it was okay. I remember the crew, and I remember certain members of the crew didn't care for Tony very much, and Tony could be a little challenging. I could see that,
Yeah.
a little bit. He treated me just fine, and I liked him, and he seemed to be good with the director, and I think the director was Gene Reynolds, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
yeah. The creator of MASH.
MASH, exactly,
Yeah.
which was a show, especially the years that Gene Reynolds was associated with it, was a show that I just loved. I mean, especially those early episodes that I think he had a lot to do with. Um, with Larry Gelbart. Larry Gelbart was writing that show a lot, and Larry Gelbart wrote. I felt like Larry Gelbart wrote like George S. Kaufman, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
And George S. Kaufman was a writer back in. He wrote with Moss Hart sometimes. He wrote back in the 30s, and he wrote a lot of stuff for the Marx Brothers. And so, if you like that kind of humor, which I do and did, I loved the Marx Brothers.
Oh, yeah.
It was a huge Groucho-phile. So that I really loved that show. And so when I found out Gene Reynolds was directing it, I was pretty excited about that. When I worked on it, I essentially worked with just Tony in a very quick kind of a scene, and it was perfectly fine to work with him.
Yeah, I'm a big Marx Brothers fan too.
Yeah. What's your favorite Marx Brothers movie?
Oh God, that's a good question. Oh, Horse Feathers. The one where they're playing.
Interesting.
The one where they're playing football. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the college movie, right? They're playing football and all that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Groucho's playing quarterback. He looks at the center's ass and goes, "Fancy meeting you here."
That is funny. Yeah. Animal Crackers is probably still my favorite, although most critics feel like Night at the Opera was their best movie, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Because Irving Thalberg, who was a screen legend producer, died way too early, but he looked at the movies and he said, I just got to get you guys organized and it'll be so much better. And he really did. Night at the Opera was, in terms of films, it was probably the best overall film. I didn't enjoy it as much. I enjoyed Animal Crackers more because I love that. I love the mayhem that they had in that movie.
Yeah, I interviewed his granddaughter, Deborah Thalberg, earlier this year, and we talked about all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, she was born way, way after, he died. And, she's very proud to have the name,
Yeah.
Then,
I mean, if you ever see the movie The Last Tycoon with Robert De Niro, Robert Mitchum.
I know about it. I haven't seen it.
Okay. That's actually based on Irving Thalberg.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's cool. I gotta check that movie out. Then you did one of John Ritter's best dramatic performances, Unnatural Causes, and I saw this. You're like lifting an army weight in the hospital as he's recovering.
Yeah. I played a character named Crazy Eddie, and that movie was actually written by John Sayles, who's an epic scriptwriter and director. Actually, Brother from Another Planet was his first one, and I think 9 Men Out.
Yeah.
So many different movies that John Sayles did. He was incredible.
Baby, It's You, Brother from Another Planet. Yeah.
Yeah. And he had a small cameo in that too. But yeah, I did work. That was my first real, I felt my first substantial kind of role. Where I would show up and do more than just one or two scenes, where I had something that I could sustain a little bit, and worked with John and.
Hello?
Yeah, I hear you. I'm sorry, I get a little emotional.
It's okay. It's okay.
When I think about John.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, he was one of the greats. I love that guy. So, I first became aware of you when you were in Short Circuit 2, and growing up, I saw this movie over and over again. I loved it. I actually loved it. I loved it better than the first because, I mean, it has just as much heart as the first, but it's got better gags in my opinion, and it's a lot funnier.
That's funny. That's funny that you say that. I think a lot of people. Some people might say, no, the first one was better or whatever. But I'm gratified to hear you say that. It was a kind of a long shoot.
Yeah.
There was a lot of sort of delays, weather delays, because we were shooting in Canada, and it can be cold. We started in September, and it dragged right up to Christmas almost. So yeah, that was fun. It was fun to do it overall, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the chemistry between Fisher Stevens and Michael McKean is hilarious, not to mention Cynthia Gibb is gorgeous. But even with a grueling shoot, I mean, was it fun?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was lucky to work with another my partner in crime, quite literally, on that was David Hemblin,
Yeah.
who was he was a wonderful actor. I mean, a
Yeah.
wonderful Canadian theater and television actor and film actor. He was just great, and I regret that he and I didn't connect more after that, because we connected so well on that set. I just love that guy. And I think he only passed away a few years ago, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I remember, I think I DM'd him like in 2018 or something, and I don't think he ever read my message, but I liked his stuff a lot. He was so good at playing bad guys,
He
and
was.
just about everything I saw him in. And this was Jack Weston's last movie. What was he like?
I like Jack a lot. I really enjoy working with Jack. And you know, I mean, I had known Jack, you know, from as a kid, from work that I'd seen him do. I saw him do The Incredible Mr. Limpet. You know, I saw him do a movie called Fuzz, which was a hilarious, goofy cop movie. A really dark kind of cop movie with Burt Reynolds, Tom Skerritt, Jack Weston, and some character actors whose names escape me right now, but guys that you would see all over the place all the time. Oh, Yul Brynner was in that too. Yul Brynner was in Fuzz.
Oh yeah,
and it was just, oh, Raquel Welch. I'm sorry, Raquel Welch was in Fuzz,
Yeah.
and that was great. So I remember Jack from all that stuff, and then
Yeah.
later Four Seasons.
The
And
Twilight Zone.
He just would pop up. Was that?
Remember he did that really good Twilight Zone episode?
Oh, yeah, it just crossed my mind. It just popped into my mind. That was a great one. Yeah, that was good. And I actually only saw that only a few years ago myself, when my wife and I were sort of binging Twilight Zone, I think on Sci-Fi, and I was like, oh, there's Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, he's like at home watching the news, and he's got that look on his face like it wasn't me.
Yeah.
It was
He may have done more than one, to be honest with you. He was so good.
Yeah, the one that I remember was that one where he's just like, I can't remember what he did necessarily, but he's just at home watching the news and just had that look on his face like it wasn't me. But
yeah, he was a dude. I can't remember exactly when he passed, but I was sad to hear it when he did.
yeah, I love that Kenneth Johnson directed this, because he was the master of sci-fi TV back in the 80s, you know, with Alien Nation and V, you know, and it boggles my mind that he would want to direct this movie. So what did he, like, was he a good director? Did he, like, you know, really, you know, drive the ship good?
Yeah, he did. I mean, the way it goes with a lot of film directors is they trust their instincts in hiring. So he didn't have to give that much direction per se in terms of acting, because, you know, he hired the people that he wanted to hire, and he knew what they would bring. So, you know, I had like 3 auditions before I got the call that they wanted me to do it. And so he took his time figuring out that I was his guy, and I'm sure he did the same with David. And I think he handpicked Fisher. Of course, came with the project from the first one, and Fisher was great. And interestingly, I don't think they would let him do that anymore, because Fisher is not a South Asian person, and he played a South Asian person, and he did it really well, and I think really respectfully too. But
Yes.
I think in this day and age, they wouldn't let him do it. And to be honest with you, when it comes to, I'm all for actors being actors and saying, look, we can do everything, but certain groups of people were overlooked for a long time in film. And so I think they should obviously get first crack at being able to play people whose ethnicities they belong to, you know, and that is represented in a film. That's just my opinion. But Fisher did a great job, obviously.
Yeah, you know, I think back in the day, you know, a lot of people who came to Hollywood from other countries, I don't think that they had, you know, the mass appeal chops to play, you know, the lead in a lot of movies. But now with all these other generations of living here and stuff, you know, they have more appeal now, you know.
I agree.
I think that, Fisher Stevens, I saw an interview he did right around the time that this one came out. He said that he went to India shortly before filming, and he was just he was loved with open arms over there. They loved how he was being portrayed. Now, cut to 2 years ago, he's apologizing for playing this character, and I don't think he should, because he did a positive interpretation, and it was a different time.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a different time, and we all have to keep that in mind when we reflective, we get reflective and retroactively judge people, and look, we're always going to judge, but there's certain criteria we have to keep in mind, and that's one. It was a different time. Nobody thought anything about it then. There was no lobby of people saying, hey, you shouldn't do this. Back then it was just like, hey, I'm an actor, here's the role, I'm going to do it. And his stand-in was a South Asian man. And Fisher would go to him for advice and would consult with him all the time. And he was very, very kind to him, and spent a lot of money in giving him gifts when the film wrapped. He's very good to him. There was a strong, genuine affection between those two guys.
Absolutely. How did the Chinese restaurant freezer smell?
I can't remember there being any actual smell associated with it. It was a set, and it was dressed. I'm not even sure there were that many actual meat products in it. The chickens were all fake and hanging there, stuff like that. But luckily, I wasn't in it for very long. I had to throw two guys in it and lock them in it, But it was that was kind of a fun scene. That's every now and then when somebody posts something about that, they post a scene with me being in Mike McKeon's face, just as that scene's happening.
Yeah, I love the showdown between you guys and Johnny Five, because he's doing all those pop culture figure voices, and David's at his wit's end. Like, after he makes you guys crash into that what was it? It was like a stack of hay or something like that.
Yeah,
he's at his wit's end. He's talking to him like a human. He's like, "Okay, jerk off, time to get recycled." And he's like, "Oh yeah, recycle this, you must sugar that schmuck."
Yeah, I know. And Johnny Five could get away with that because he's such a sponge, where he takes in everything that he's experienced during that film. And I think he was basically doing that guy he met earlier, who was played by Rummy Bishop.
Mm-hmm.
The Rummy Bishop was he was a nightclub comic in Canada, and I'm going to confess something. I saw Rummy Bishop for the first time when I used to sneak into a strip club called Starvin' Marvin's, and he was the host. He would be the comic between acts. And that was my first exposure to Rummy Bishop, and I can't remember if I met him or not, but if I had, I probably wouldn't bring that up to him.
Good old Rummy Bishop. Yeah, he had one of those names, just like Stubby K,
Yeah. And I always mistakenly thought he was Joey Bishop's brother, but I don't think he was, to be honest.
No, and even if he was, he probably wouldn't admit to it, because I heard a lot of awful things about Joey Bishop.
Oh yeah, but he was part of that. He was part of that rat pack. Joey Bishop was.
Absolutely. And then, oh my God, your character Saunders is such a bumbler. He's like, "Hey, you got water cooled tubes. I got an error message for you. I'll scramble your ribs." And he's like, "Oh, like I'm really scared now for sure."
Yeah, that was fun. And it's funny because there's a scene where obviously before that where we're pretty much dismantling Johnny on the street. Mm-hmm. And I remember speaking to Ken, and I said, "Look, Ken, I'm gonna sort of take a certain approach to this scene." I said, if I have any kind of attachment to anyone in this movie, it's this robot here. Uh-huh. And it may not be for the most altruistic reasons, but I feel some kind of a bond and a connection with this robot. And he said, "Yeah, go for it." And so that's sort of the approach I took with it. But by that time, it's becoming a survival of the fittest kind of thing. It's me or the robot at that point, and the robot won.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah, and I'm sure you guys had stuntmen when you were being twirled around in the warehouse, and he says, "To the moon, Alice."
You know what? I'll tell you what. those were not stuntmen. Those were actually dummies built to look like us, and they rigged up this thing so that as he was spinning these dummies. They had a couple of stuntmen when he throws us out of the building and we fly out the door and land. There were a couple stunt guys doing us there, and then they pick up with us on the ground, obviously. But as they were doing that twirling in the actual warehouse itself, they were literally dummies that were built up and put on this rigging thing that he was spinning around with.
Oh, crazy. So what was it like working with Cronenberg on Dead Ringers?
Well, that was, for some reason, I was really, really nervous about that day. And it was only one day. And I was about to work with David Cronenberg, and I believe I almost didn't sleep at all the night before. So when I showed up the next day, I was kind of fighting exhaustion all day and stress. And I remember being just a little too anxious on the set, as we were sitting getting to rehearse. It was him and me and everyone else in the scene, including Jeremy Irons. And he's just sort of putting it together in his mind. And I remember saying, and when do you want me to say this line, David? And he just kind of half smiled and looked at me and he said, at the most appropriate time. I said, oh, I'm sorry. And he said, no, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. So I do remember I was like a little anxious to get going and do this and try to impress David Cronenberg. And so, it was an entire day. We did that. Nobody knows what I was in that, head to toe. We were in this red garb, halfway between a surgeon and a cardinal. It was kind of interesting.
Yeah. What was it like working with Jeremy Irons?
What a pro that guy was. He just he had a lot on his plate during that film, playing two different characters. So he basically would sit off to the side between scenes, between shots and setups. He would just sit off to the side. Nobody bothered him. He would be by himself and he'd be thinking and smoking a cigarette. That's what I remember about him. And he was very nice, very complimentary at the end of the day. But for the most part, he just stayed within his bubble, his own little world between setups.
Yeah. Did you work with Stephen Lack?
Who is Stephen Lack?
Let's see, what was his character's name? He was in Scanners, which Cronenberg directed as well. He's a very interesting guy. I've interviewed him. Let's see, who does he play?
I didn't work with him that I can remember, Tommy.
He played Anders. Yeah. You guys wore those red.
Yeah, I was in that. Oh, I beg your pardon. Go ahead, Tommy. I didn't.
You wore those red veil scrubs, which was weird.
I know.
Yeah. So
my wife saw that movie and she said, "Which one were you?" I said, "I'm that one right there. That's me."
Oh, I could tell who you were. I could see by the eyes who you were.
Yeah.
Yeah, I talked to a horror fan earlier this month who said that she hated the movie and she thought it was misogynistic. I guess in a way it is. Two gynecologists fight over a demon woman.
Yeah, and apparently I haven't seen it, but apparently the whole thing was redone with a woman, Rachel Weisz, who's a wonderful actor, playing both those roles and a different reimagining of it. I don't know if you've heard about that, but it was a limited series a little while ago, I think, on Netflix or Amazon or one of those.
Absolutely, I haven't seen it yet, but I'll check that one out as well. Now, I'm not familiar with this one, Smokescreen. That was
Smokes.
Kim Cattrall and Dean Stockwell.
Oh, so that was originally titled Palais Royale.
Uh-huh.
That was the shooting title of that one. I was actually shooting that at the same time I was shooting Short Circuit 2. And I remember coming on the set one night for a shoot of Palais Royale, and Kim said to me, "Oh, so I hear you're the reason we had to do this night shoot." And I said, "Really?" She goes, "Yeah, your schedule. You're shooting what?" And I said, "I'm shooting Short Circuit 2." And she said, "Oh yeah, they ran that one by me in Hollywood." She said, No thanks. I just didn't think much of it, and I had to bite my tongue because I wanted to say, yeah, not to be compared with Mannequin, I guess, which was a really terrible film she did with Andrew McCarthy, but I stopped myself from saying it because I still had to work with her for a few more days after that.
Yeah, Martin Labbat directed. I remember he did the voice of this effeminate prince in the cartoon movie Heavy Metal.
Martin did?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah. Martin was he was a character, that guy. He was a character. He would be honest, I didn't understand all the decisions he was making on that, but he was a director, and I think I think the producers were at times a little frustrated with him too.
Yeah.
Because I had to do some reshoots on it later, and we did some reshoots, and the producer called me up to do them. And he said, "Oh, by the way, the editor will be directing you on this." I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Yeah, we're not working with Martin anymore." I said, "Okay." Just came in and did the reshoot, and that was it. But yeah, that was that. The working title was Palais Royale, and I thought they. You said Smoke Screen. I thought they released it as Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. You worked with Brian Dennehy on Day One and FX2. I've talked to his daughter. What was he like?
Well, listen. Brian was a certain kind of guy.
Yeah.
Brian had to be in charge of pretty much everything. That was just saying. He'd show up and he was the guy. He was in charge. That's it. What are you doing? Why are you over here? Be over here. Dee, can you be over here in this scene with? Can you be right here? That's good. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. That's Brian. Brian was he can be a little challenging, I guess. But look, I like Brian, and his body of work is undeniable.
Oh.
And Brian is he's a wonderful actor, actually.
Yeah.
And he had I wish I'd seen his theater work, and I know he loved theater, and I did too. But I remember the first day I met him on FX2. I had done Day One with him a few years previous, and I had actually changed quite a bit by the time I came to do FX2. I had stopped certain really, really bad habits that I had, and got healthier and looked quite a bit different. I was in much better shape and everything. And I remember we did a reading. He and Brian Brown and the director and I. Brian Brown wasn't in the scene I did with Brian Dennehy, but I arrived there to do this reading, and they said, "Well, sit here. Brian and Brian are rehearsring right now." So I sat in with them and just heard them read some stuff, go back and forth. And I kind of wish I had worked with Brian Brown because he seemed like such a nice guy, and I liked his work as an actor too. So they were reading for a bit, and then Brian Brown left, and so it was just me and Brian Dennehy and the director, and we're chatting, and he kind of looks at me and he said. He said something, and I said, "Well, and actually, Brian, we've worked together before." He said, "I effing knew it. I knew it. When we work on Day One," he goes, "Oh yeah, you look different. You look like you beefed up a little since then." I said, "Yeah, I definitely have." And he goes, "All right, good." And we're chatting a bit, and he would push a little bit, and I would push back, and I decided to push back, which is, Brian's a big guy. It's not like he's a violent guy. He's a big guy, and he's got a big personality and a big presence. So if you're going to push back, you better be prepared for a little back and forth with him, which I got. And then he ended with, look, no, listen to me. Look, I want your character to be as rich as you want to make him. And I said, that's great. We're going to have a good time shooting this.
Yeah.
And then when I showed up to shoot it, there had been quite a few script changes that I didn't get. So he said, "Oh, let's run lines." And I said, "You bet." So we started running lines. He goes, No. What are you doing? I said, he goes, "No, man, they rewrote that. It's all different." I said, "What?" He said, somebody get him a script, get him his sides. This is stupid, And I'm like, oh, man. So right now, right off the bat, I'm a little bit behind the 8 ball with Brian, which is not a place you want to be.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm 2 steps back, and he's got a little more leverage on me now. So I'm sitting there, and I'm a very quick study, so I can pick up lines very quickly, and I did. And we just kept running him. He's very generous that way. He's like, yeah, let's keep doing them. And every time we had a bit of a break, we would just keep doing it. And we got through the day. And I just thought, just throughout the day, it got really clear to me. I thought that Brian Dennehy is a John Wayne for the 90s. Yeah. That's what I thought in my mind. He's got that John Wayne vibe, Yeah. Although I like Brian as an actor more than John Wayne.
Yeah. His daughter told me he was the life of the rap party. I mean, he could drink and have a good time.
No doubt. He was a big guy, and as he never got tired of saying, he was Irish. I remember him. He was reading a scene with Brian Brown, and I'm watching him read, and they're setting it up, and the director says, "Yeah, all right. So you're sitting there, Brian, and what are you doing? What are you doing before the scene? Are you crying?" And he said, "No, drinking." And then he paused and he said, Irish crying.
That's great. Yeah. Did you know that he worked with David Hemblin in Tommy Boy?
No, I knew he was in Tommy Boy, but I guess I didn't know that David had been in Tommy Boy.
Yeah, they have.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, they're at his wedding. They're closing a business deal shortly before he dies during the wedding song, right? And then he says to David, you can get a good look at a T-bone steak by sticking my head up a butcher's ass, but wouldn't you rather take your word for it? And of course, Chris Farley, he repeats that line later in the movie because he's like doing everything that his dad used to do, And Hemblin was in that role too.
Great. David Hemblin had this voice, man. He had this voice that came from 3 layers of earth down. It just came from underneath his toes somewhere. He just had a wonderful voice, which is another reason why he was so effective in theater too. He could just stand there and resonate. Remember, I had a voice teacher in New York. He would say, "Hey Dee, we don't project.
Yeah,
we resonate. Dee. We resonate."
David. I think one of your best roles was in Final Embrace.
I love doing that movie.
Yeah,
I love doing that movie. Yeah. That was one of my LA things that I did. I was in LA when I did that one, and I really wish I'd gotten to meet Roger, whose studio it was.
Yeah, there's Robert Russler and Nancy Vallon, who I've interviewed. She's a great lady.
Oh, you interviewed Nancy? I like Nancy.
Yeah, she was one of my earliest guests, in the first few months. That's great. Back in 2017.
She was. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, she was lovely, and she was a good actor, and she was smart. She took her time trying to. Every scene she has something to say. She had thought it through pretty thoroughly. And I thought, oh, good for you. I liked her.
Yeah, and also, I mean,
Dick Van... who else? I later worked with Dick Van Patten. Man, I loved Dick.
Yeah.
He was great. Dick, I'm sorry, I don't know what kind of leeway do we have on your podcast with language?
Oh, you can swear all you want.
Okay, so I remember Dick. We improvised. There was a little scene that we improvised a dialogue of after they're arresting me at the end of that and taking me out. He's the cop, and he's standing there, and they're taking me out in handcuffs. And I stop in front of him and I say, "You all making the mistake of your career." And he says, "Get in the fucking car." And Dick was you would think the earth would crack before Dick as a person would cuss, and he never cussed in that film until then. He just improvised that line, and it was
funny. It's funny seeing him.
Nancy thought it was funny. Nancy was
Oh, yeah, she married his
Go ahead.
son later.
I was just saying she was dating Niels Van Patten
Yeah.
at that time, and that was so. Dick was going to be her father-in-law, and I actually worked with Niels. Niels wasn't an actor per se, but he did a small role in this this small film I did. That I don't know if it ever even got released. Everybody worked on it for free. Yeah, and Niels was in that one. And so I saw Nancy again on that because she came around to the set one day. But Niels was a really nice guy. Did you know, and this is just purely random, his hair, he had the most beautiful hair in the world. And apparently, back in the 70s, Farrah Fawcett met him, and he was a young kid at the time, and he still had that hair. And she said, "That's the hair I want." And she got somebody to do it like that, and that was her iconic hairstyle, and it actually came from Niels Van Patten.
Yeah.
That's what Nancy told me anyway.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, I mean, Dick Van Patten, seeing him as a gritty cop and not a warm, lovable father figure, it's just so hilarious to me.
Yeah, and he we were chatting one day, between setups or whatever, and one of his best friends is Martin Sheen.
Oh, yeah.
And Martin Sheen is somebody who I have absolutely admired and adored, not only as an actor, but just as a human being. I just think, he's just such an exceptional, extraordinary person, and an incredible actor. I think undervalued as an actor. When you think back to Badlands, Apocalypse Now, and a TV movie that called The Execution of Private Slovak, which was just so hard to watch because he was so good in it. I just adored it. So when I found out Dick and Martin Sheen were friends, I couldn't stop asking Dick about Martin Sheen, and then I think I knew when to stop.
Yeah. You did an episode of The Commish. How was that experience?
Oh, it was great. I love working with Michael Chiklis. He was such a good guy. Great set. And I remember I was doing the scene, and I tried to make the character as rich as possible. And at one point, during a little break, he looked over at the producers and the director, and he pointed to me and he said, "Hey, series regular, what do you think?" And I thought, yeah, keep talking, Michael, keep talking, man. I want to do that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that didn't happen. They did call me at one point to come back and reprise the character, but I was in L.A., and when I first shot The Commish, I actually happened to be up in Vancouver visiting some friends. And I was living in L.A., and I went up to Vancouver to visit friends, and my agency in Toronto had a branch in Vancouver, so they started sending me out, and that's how I got that gig. But when they called me up to reprise the role, I said, "Great, will you guys fly me up?" And then, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, I'm in LA." And they went, "Oh, yeah, hang on." And then they rewrote it because they didn't want to fly me up. They were too cheap.
Telly Savalas was in that episode.
What's that?
Telly Savalas was in that episode.
Yeah, he was. I do wish it. That's probably one of the last things Telly Savalas did too. And I wish I had met him. But we didn't have any scenes together. He wasn't even on set the days I was shooting. So that was too bad. But that would have been fun to meet Telly Savalas, another guy who I understand was a pretty strong presence on a set and obviously on film too. But that would have been great. But Michael Chiklis was just the greatest guy. Seriously.
And it was directed by Rob Hedden, who directed Jason Takes Manhattan, Friday the 13th, Part 8. And just like Short Circuit 2, it takes place in New York, but shot in Toronto.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Rob Rustler, who I worked with on that Roger Corman film, Final Embrace, he also had done, it was one of the Nightmare on Elm Streets. He did one of the Nightmare on Elm Street things. That's right. He was telling me about
Nightmare on Elm Street 2.
Yeah.
How about the episode of Highlander?
Yeah. Yeah, that was a fairly extended shoot, actually. My biggest takeaway from that is I almost wrecked a motorcycle. My character rode around on a motorcycle, And it was I had ridden a motorcycle very, very briefly in my teens. And so this was many years later. And this was a vintage Indian motorcycle. And they said, well, if possible, we'd like you to ride it. I said, well, no problem, no problem. So they put a day aside where me and the guy who was my stunt double and the guy who owned the motorcycle and the stunt coordinator on the show all went out to ride this motorcycle. And my stuntman got on. He rode it just fine. They said, okay, now your turn. And I thought, oh, man, I don't know if this is going to go well. And not only that, this bike was so vintage. And I rode a motorcycle since then. I rode a motorcycle after that for years, actually. But this bike was so vintage, it literally had a stick shift that you switch the gears with a shift in your hand. Which is not normally what happens on, modern motorcycles. It's all done in your foot. You clutch with your left hand, and you're changing gears with your left foot. But not this motorcycle. It had a stick shift, and I'm like, oh man! And it was big. They just said, ride down to the end of the street and turn around and come back. And I said, no problem. And I get down the end of the street, and I'm trying to turn it, and I crash it. Nothing big, nothing bad, but I did put it down. So they needed a few repairs on it, but it wasn't a big deal. And it was like, so your stunt double is going to be riding the bike on the show. And I said, yeah, I think that's a good idea. So that happened.
Yeah, the guy you played was kind of creepy. The way he was just petting that dog and telling that woman her hair was beautiful and all that stuff.
Yeah, that was pretty freaky. And there was a scene in a park where I see this one woman, and I'm scouting her out, but she moves away, and I don't get her, and I'm kind of upset about that. And that the woman who was actually playing that role was Michael J. Fox's sister. Actually.
Oh yeah,
I forget her name. Yeah, she was very nice.
Blood Fist 5. You got to work with Don the Dragon Wilson.
Yeah, that was a goofy little role. I just played like a motel manager, and they called me in. That was one of Roger Corman's film company's films as well. So I remember coming in, and they said, "Yeah, look, Dee, I know you did a lead for us before. This isn't really much, but would you mind? Could you do this?" And I said, "Yeah, I could do it. Why not?" I wasn't working at the time. It ended up being literally one of the last things I ended up doing as an actor. So first of all, I knew nothing about him. I knew nothing about modern day martial arts films. I left martial arts films behind when I was 16 or 17 with the last of the Bruce Lee films, I think. And so I had no idea who Don the Dragon Wilson was. But when I went to work as a messenger, one of my colleagues there said, you work with Don the Dragon Wilson? I said, I guess, yeah. He's like, do you know how famous he is? I said, yeah, okay, whatever. He was all right, I'm sure he's a wonderful guy. But yeah, very quick little scene, in and out.
You did a couple episodes of Tech War, including one that William Shatner directed, and Hemblin was in one of those episodes. That's
funny. I never knew David was in that. Yeah, I didn't know. By that time, I had moved to L.A.,
yeah.
But I came back to Toronto for a very long summer. I think I came back in May and went back to LA in September. And I don't think I stopped working almost the entire time that I was there. I did some commercials. I did Tech War. I did a CBC show. I did something else, I'm sure. But I remember auditioning for Bill Shatner. And that was interesting, and he said, when it was finished, he goes, I can't believe you just did what you did. And I said, hey, look, it's the future. Who knows what these people are like, right? And he said, yes. Yeah. So, he cast me almost immediately, and I was really happy about it. Because he's iconic, and people that I work with after that say, so what was it like to work with Shatner? He's got a reputation, And I said, yeah, I've heard about that reputation, but let me tell you something. He was great to me. Maybe somebody sussed him up about his reputation and he corrected his behavior, but he was nothing but good to me and to the actor who played the lead in that thing, Greg, I think. he was great to both of us the whole time. And I worked with. I ended up working a little bit, or at least seeing on set Gene. I'd worked with him in Unnatural Causes. Big guy, African American actor, wonderful guy. He did some stand-up comedy as well. Just such a good guy. So it was nice to see him again.
Did you work with Natalie? Did you work with Natalie Radford?
Who was that? The name is not familiar. Who'd she play?
I forget her character's name. She may have not even been on yet. She came on that show a little bit later. She was like the love interest of Greg Evigan or something like that. I talked to her a few years ago.
Oh, she wasn't. She didn't play his ex-wife, did she? That was a Canadian actress who did that.
That may have been her. Yeah, well, she is Canadian. She still lives in Canada.
Oh, okay, probably was. Yeah, you know what? I actually met her previously, if it's the same person, on an episode of Street Legal, which was a Canadian sort of show. I did a couple episodes of that one, and then I did another one much later, which I liked a lot more. But yeah, could be. But I enjoyed doing Tech War. It was a fun character. It was a goofy character. Yeah. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, Sheena Easton played a war bride in an episode. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, I know.
I wish
I met her.
Oh, you met her?
No, I wish I had.
Oh, okay.
The way it worked is you're on, especially as an actor who just plays at a certain level. If you're not playing the lead on something, you're in on these days to do your scene or scenes. If you're lucky, you got a couple, maybe you get a couple, 3 days on something, and you tend to be around the same actors each time. So there could be all kinds, as film casts are very big. You actually interact as a sort of so-called day player actor.
Yeah.
You interact with a very small number of people on the show. So people say, "Hey, did you meet so-and-so?" No, I didn't. We weren't on set at the same time, and so we didn't meet. So I didn't meet many of the people on that too, obviously. But I worked with Greg pretty extensively. Nice guy, really good guy, and a really good actor too. He really he really had me bump up my game. He wasn't trying to, but it was just like Greg starts the scene before the cameras are rolling. I mean, I'm usually in my mind in the scene before the camera's rolling, but Greg is actively doing the scene. So he'll start improvising with you before the scene starts to shoot. And it is a really good springboard creatively to when they say action and boom, your dialogue, the way it's written on the page, you're jumping into that. So you've got a good springboard into that.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be a good actor to work with a monkey on BJ and the Bear.
I remember Sean Hayes one time on Will and Grace. He made some comment about Greg Evigan. He goes, Greg Evigan, as an actor, has done 2 movies with the gayest titles ever, My Two Dads and BJ and the Bear.
Love it.
Yeah.
Did you work with Walter Matthau in Incident in a Small Town?
Yeah, I did. I had a little scene with Walter, a good old curmudgeon-y kind of Walter, but he was very nice, and it was a very small scene, and Stephanie Zimbalist too was there that day. I didn't work with Harry Morgan. I wish I had, but Stephanie Zimbalist was there too. She seemed really good. I wish I had more to do in that, but there you go.
Harry Morgan had bad Alzheimer's the last 10 years he was working. I heard he had trouble memorizing lines and stuff.
Yeah, even without Alzheimer's, the line memorization thing for actors as they age, it's one of the first things to go. It becomes, and I'm in a sense, it never happened to me because I didn't, I left acting at a certain point. I was still in my 30s when I left acting, but I was somebody who could I pick up lines so very quickly. By the time a play opens, I know everybody's lines. Even before it opens, I know everybody's lines.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody. I don't need to be on book. I just know it. I put down a book quicker than anybody, and I'm trying to work it. But the sooner I get that book out of my hand, the better for me when you're working on a play. I know a lot of actors, they actually function really well holding on to that book. And when they have to put that book down, they basically know the lines and they're barely looking at it. But when they have to put that book down, that's a kind of a traumatic moment for them because they've been holding on to it like a lifeline. And it takes them a day or two after they do that to feel like they can really be back in it again. But for me, the way I worked, the sooner I got that book down, the better. And I really didn't have to sit there and repeat lines over and over and memorize them. I would just read the script. And if I could read it just 2 or 3 times, I pretty much knew my lines.
Yeah. Did you work with Angela Lansbury on Murder, She Wrote?
No, I didn't. There's another example of not having a scene with somebody and so not getting to meet them on the set. That was just a real kind of a quick little thing there that I did with a couple different actors.
So why did you quit? Why did you quit acting at a certain point?
Well, I had come down here to LA with my then wife and son, and we literally packed up everything we owned into our 1987 Hyundai Excel, one of the worst cars in the world, by the way, and drove from Toronto right through the U.S., right through Texas, into Mexico. Took a little vacation there. Just went over the border at El Paso, and then from there we shot up to L.A. And within a year, my wife and I had split up, and I had a son at the time who was he was 5 years old. And the smartest thing I could have done career-wise was to go back to Canada and start working again there, and then come back to LA, but time it a little bit different. When I came down here, it's not like I was coming right off a big project that I had done. And had I done that, things would have gone a lot differently for me. But I didn't know that that's what you do, and that is really what you should do. If you're gonna relocate, make sure you're coming down here when something you've done is kind of hot, or even if it's just opening, and you have a much better chance of getting a good agent, which if you don't have a good agent in LA, you're not going to go out.
Yeah.
You're just not. And I didn't have a great agent. I had a middling agent, but then even that agency, it was called the Light Agency. Vicky Light ran it, and she got sick. She got stricken with something, and rather than sell the agency, she just closed it down. So just as I was starting to book some work here, the agency closed down, and I had a hard time finding a decent agent. As a matter of fact, I didn't find one. So when my marriage collapsed, I didn't want to go back to Canada and not live in the same city as my son, and be an absent father, which is, for some you might say it's not really being a father at all. I didn't want to do that. So I decided to stay here and change careers. That's what I did.
Yeah, so what do you got going on these days?
Well, from there, I just did whatever job I could while I went to school at night and became a paralegal. And from there, I went to work with the music company in Malibu. And from there, I went to work at NBC, actually, in the law department. And from there, I went to work at NBC Studios as a staff person from the law department, doing a quasi-legal job and various things. And then when NBC's parent company, GE, acquired Universal, part of what I did at NBC was music licensing, and many things associated with music, but none of the sexy stuff, just administrative stuff. And so when we merged with Universal, my job, I had the option of going into production operations, which is what I was in, but leaving the music part behind, or going into the music department. And I decided I liked the people in that department more. And so that's what I did. So to this day, that was a lot of years ago, I licensed music for NBC Universal.
Wow. It's God. You've been on a roller coaster ride, and yeah, I mean NBC. I mean, once they merged with Universal, I mean it became like a whole global enterprise, and even more so than NBC ever had before.
That's correct. I mean, what NBC wanted for a long time was a studio, and they never had a studio. Like a big studio behind it. ABC had Disney, CBS had Paramount, but NBC didn't have anything. Fox obviously had Fox Studios. NBC didn't have a big studio. They produced their content at random smaller studios all around Hollywood or New York at times. And sometimes out of state in different places, but they didn't have that big studio. So when they merged with Universal, now they had an iconic studio, and I mean a big studio. Universal lot it's just gigantic, and the history behind that place is exceptional. I mean it's over 100 years old. It's over 100 years old. They've been making movies. That's amazing.
It is. It is. Well, you've survived and you've made it through, and you're still here to tell the stories. And I appreciate it so much you coming on today, Dee. This has just been fantastic.
It's so kind of you to invite me, Tommy. I was so surprised, and the reason I kind of hesitated at first was I thought, really? This somebody actually wants to talk to me. I remember when I first came to LA, I was opening a bank account, and I went into the bank. Now, I was opening the account, and the teller, a young guy, he said, are you the Dee McCafferty who's in movies? And I said, man, you need to get a life. If you know who I am, you really need to get a life. Yeah. And I confess I had that feeling about you for a moment. It's like, what? You are way too deep down the rabbit hole, Tommy. But I listen, I appreciate it so much. Yeah. And I appreciate that you spend your time looking out for performers and possibly other people too who've made a contribution, but it hasn't been as big in the limelight as some of the really big people. And I appreciated hearing from you, and I had a really nice conversation with you.
That means
and I
a lot.
Thank you so much.
That means a lot to me, Dee. Yes, that's exactly what I try to do. Thank you so much for that sweet compliment. And you have yourself a great holiday season, and be safe out there.
Same to you. Thank you again, Tommy. Maybe we'll talk again. Take care, buddy.
I would love that. Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Well, there you have it. Dee McCafferty. Oh, what a sweet guy, huh? I love my Canadians. Wow. To go from acting to working as a paralegal and being affiliated with NBC when it went through its global change, that's phenomenal. I'm so glad we got to talk today. I'm glad I made him feel good. I love making people feel good. I love my podcast. So lucky. Well, until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past because the present sucks. Later, dudes!